Actually spoke at a grandparents' day 4 or 5 years back, and children were fouling in rather than fouling out while I was talking. I'm like, this is the friendliest crowd I've ever spoken to, because all throughout the talk, people were waving, smiling, waving at us. What a friendly bunch. So I actually, no kidding, I actually asked Don, I sent him an email. I said, now are they going to be filing in behind me while I'm talking, so I know whether people are waving at me or not? But is this, how many for you, this is your very first Grandparents' Day here at TCA? Wow, well that's welcome. I'm really honored, and I really mean that. It's an honor for me to get a chance to share a little bit with you. I know that this is one of those speaking occasions where they talk about a tough act to follow. And I know I just can't compete with that, and I also know you're looking forward to the next groups that come in. So I'll try to be brief, but it's also fun for me to talk to grandparents in particular, partly because, as Don mentioned, the idea for TCA, the part that's not totally correct, this was absolutely my wife's idea. You know how that goes, and I always share that with people because it's really true. When Mary first shared some of the ideas behind why she wanted to start a charter school, my first reaction really was, first of all, you must be out of your mind. That was captured. That's actually a little snippets captured on video, a reenactment. But you know, my part of the reason was I thought, is this really necessary? And it's grandparents that will understand. There's certainly been a change in the American culture, but there's also been a change in education. And to be honest with you, I really didn't get that. She told me some stories at the time, and some of the stories revolved around how reading is taught. And again, my background wasn't in education, and she tried to explain to me that some schools don't really emphasize the idea that B represents the sound B and at, and you put those together and that makes a word back. I thought, oh, come on, you must be kidding. Because, I mean, that's the way I was taught, and I just assumed somehow that things haven't really changed over, the 20 or 30 years that have been since I was, in that age. Another area that had changed was the idea that a lot of schools don't really teach history. And I thought, well, what do you mean? And she told me about this idea of social studies had kind of supplanted this idea of history, and that some children really, didn't hear much about people like George Washington or Ben Franklin or Thomas Jefferson. And she said, if you look in the back of the textbook, if you ever pick up a history textbook, one of the quickest ways to sort of get a little bit of feel for where the textbook is coming from is to look in the index and see how many references there are to someone like George Washington, as opposed to other characters and figures from history like Susan B. Anthony or something like that. And I thought, wow, I really didn't realize that education had changed. And then the third story had to do with correcting children and the emphasis on self-esteem and sort of the fear of damaging their self-esteem by making them feel bad if they didn't get the right answer. And again, all I can say is I was very, very skeptical at the time. And I've come to realize as a husband, it's probably not a good move to, when your wife tells you something and you don't believe her. I've really learned through experience that that was probably not one of my best moments. And now when she tells me something, especially when she knows a lot more about it than I do, I take a much more humble position. But I think you can all understand, you can grasp, kind of as I tell those little stories and just give you little tastes, the truth behind that. Whereas I think the younger generations, it's hard for them to see how much things have changed. And so, actually last week, I happened to go to church we meet downtown, and we had moved from a small building into Homer High School. So we're meeting in the auditorium there. It's kind of a new thing for our little congregation. And somebody decided, well, we need to sort of pray over the school, and someone got up on stage and shared, talked a little bit about praying for the students and praying for the coaches and praying for the teachers. And every school has students and teachers and coaches. But it was interesting, as that was going on, I just sort of looked around, and we were in a building, and thought, well, I wonder what really is taught here. I really, as we pray, there's some things that are very generic, but there's other things that, I really don't know much about this school. Does it even have a philosophy of education, or does each teacher kind of do, what they see fit in the classroom? And I thought, it's one of the neat things about a charter school. So the Classical Academy is a charter school, which means it's free to have an educational philosophy, and it is free to stand for something. And I say that, when you think about it, it's kind of hard for a neighborhood school necessarily to take a stand for something, because it has to serve kind of its demographic, and its demographic is kind of defined by, its zip code, where charter school legislation allowed some people with their own ideas to say, hey, let's start a school that's based on these values and these ideas. Then let's share those ideas with people and make it perfectly okay to say, gee, if this is what you're looking for, if this is a choice that parents can have for what they want their children to, the values and the community and the educational philosophy, and if it fits, great, and if it doesn't fit, that's really okay too. So TCA, and I think really it's true for all charter schools, I say they are really able to stand for some type of philosophy. But not all charter schools stand for the same philosophy. Just because something is a charter school, if you hear that, if you've got a grandchild in Florida and they go to a charter school, there's no reason to assume that the charter school that they go to stands for anything or has any kind of educational philosophy in common with TCA. So each charter school is free to sort of have its own theory of education. So what is our theory of education? What are our values? Well, you may have heard, if you've been exposed to one of these before, we have a document that's called the Core Values document. It's up on our website, and the way that we developed that document just a few years ago, because for the first 10 or 12 years, in order to try to explain to you what TCA was about, I would just tell a story, or you'd get little vignettes, and some oral tradition was passed along. But we decided to form a committee a few years back and really try to document some of those values. I know that there's probably about 6 pages there, and I doubt many of you are going to rush home and want to read that document. So I just wanted to give a couple, just give you a taste. And one of the values that you see there is that freedom isn't free. Now, why does history matter in terms of understanding that freedom isn't free? Well, I just don't think that children can develop a value like gratitude without really understanding the price that was paid by those that came before them to give them the environment. See, if you're just born into America, and you just sort of think, well, I've arrived, I was born, 6 years ago, or 5 years ago, or whatever the case may be, and you think, well, maybe it was always like this. Maybe this country was always like this. Maybe the world's always been like this. Maybe this is just sort of typical. Well, America's not typical. And there's a reason why, we are what we are. And having a foundation of knowledge where you understand the actual events that took place, not just the idea of historical analysis, but they really have content. So that becomes the foundation. Another example is the rule of law. I was just talking about my children are older now. In fact, when we started TCA, my daughter was, my oldest was in 2nd grade. She's now graduated from TCA. So we've had a journey through time and opportunities to have different types of conversations that are appropriate at different age levels. And I'm making a point. I'm trying to be dramatic about that a little bit because I want to make a point. So the idea of the rule of law, you understand, you can look around and feel frustrated with the justice system, or you see some sort of an injustice in America. But do they have the context and the background to realize, for centuries in many, many countries, the idea of being equal under the law is a very, very, very foreign concept, right? If you were, a king or a lord and you committed a crime against someone who was in the lower class, well, the people from the lower class didn't have a chance to really accuse you of doing something wrong, right? So this whole idea, you get that, right? You get that. See, but how will children understand and appreciate gratitude for the fact that, we're not perfect, but wow, this is a really neat concept, the rule of law.